In 1958, a quiet suburb in the town of Mattoon, Illinois, was shaken by a series of bizarre and terrifying incidents that became known as the Mattoon Monster or the Mad Gasser of Mattoon. The events remain one of the most eerie, unsolved mysteries in American history. It began in late summer with reports from residents who experienced strange and unexplained symptoms. They described feeling dizzy, nauseous, and disoriented, with a peculiar, almost chemical smell lingering in the air. Some reported a sensation of paralysis and a creeping sense of fear. These incidents were accompanied by sightings of a mysterious figure, an elusive, shadowy figure wearing dark clothing and a mask. One particularly unsettling event occurred on August 31, 1958. A local woman named Elsie Henson woke up in the middle of the night feeling dizzy and nauseous. She noticed a strange odor in her bedroom, like something akin to gasoline or chemicals. Her husband, Walter, also experienced a similar sensation. They found a strange residue on their bed and around their home, which they couldn't identify. As they tried to make sense of the situation, they spotted a shadowy figure outside their window, but it vanished before they could get a closer look. The reports continued to flood in. People described seeing an individual in dark clothing lurking around their homes, often accompanied by the same disturbing symptoms and chemical smell. There were several instances where people reported feeling a sense of paralysis or an inability to move, only to find that the mysterious figure had disappeared by the time they could react. Authorities were baffled. They investigated the possibility of a gas leak or some form of chemical exposure but found no evidence of such incidents. No traces of chemicals were detected, and no one could identify the source of the mysterious odor. The situation grew more disturbing when, on several occasions, witnesses described a figure in dark clothing or a gas mask, further fueling the idea of a person deliberately carrying out these attacks. However, no concrete evidence was ever found linking anyone to these disturbing occurrences. The case remained unsolved, and the community was left with a lingering sense of dread and uncertainty. The Mattoon Monster or Mad Gasser of Mattoon was never caught, and the sightings and attacks gradually ceased. Despite numerous theories and investigations, no one was ever definitively identified as the perpetrator. The mysterious episodes faded into obscurity, but the fear and paranoia they left behind continued to haunt the town. To this day, the events of the Mattoon Monster remain an unsettling chapter in the annals of unsolved mysteries. The idea of a shadowy figure lurking in the night, using an unknown and unsettling method to terrorize a community, leaves a chilling sense of what might be lurking in the shadows, just out of sight. As the months passed, the initial frenzy surrounding the Mattoon Monster began to wane, but the fear never fully dissipated. The town remained on edge, with many residents installing additional locks on their doors and avoiding venturing out after dark. The mystery seemed to have vanished as suddenly as it had arrived, but the unease never left the community. Then, in the winter of 1959, something even more unsettling happened. A local librarian, Mrs. Agnes Hale, stumbled upon a dusty old book while cleaning out a neglected corner of the library's storage room. The book, bound in worn leather and filled with handwritten notes and diagrams, appeared to be a journal from the early 1900s. The pages were filled with descriptions of strange experiments and arcane rituals, alongside what appeared to be sketches of chemical compounds and occult symbols. As Mrs. Hale flipped through the pages, she was struck by a passage that detailed a disturbing experiment, one that involved creating a chemical compound to induce fear and paralysis in people. The journal's author, a scientist turned occultist named Dr. Victor Ellison, claimed to have tested his concoction on a few unsuspecting individuals, but the results were inconclusive. He had described his goal as exploring the boundaries of human fear. The book's final entries, dated just before Dr. Ellison's mysterious disappearance in 1911, mentioned that he had decided to conduct one last series of tests in a small town. The entries abruptly ended, but the journal included a list of ingredients and a detailed method for creating the chemical compound. When the town's residents heard about Mrs. Hale's discovery, theories abounded. Some believed that the Mattoon Monster might have been a descendant or follower of Dr. Ellison, carrying on his dark experiments. Others thought the book might have inspired someone in the present day to recreate the experiments described within its pages. Intrigued by the journal, a local historian named Jonathan Reed decided to dig deeper into Dr. Ellison's past. He uncovered records that revealed Dr. Ellison was a brilliant but controversial figure who had been dismissed from several prestigious institutions due to his unorthodox methods. His research had delved into both cutting-edge chemistry and occult practices, and his disappearance had been shrouded in mystery. Jonathan also discovered that Dr. Ellison had been working on a secret project involving a rare chemical compound derived from certain plants and minerals. This compound was believed to be capable of inducing hallucinatory and paralyzing effects. Ellison's notes suggested that the compound could be administered discreetly, leading to symptoms similar to those experienced by the Mattoon victims. As Jonathan pieced together the puzzle, he began to suspect that the Mattoon Monster might have been a person with a deep knowledge of chemistry and the occult, someone who had stumbled upon or been inspired by Dr. Ellison's work. This individual might have used the chemical compound to create fear and chaos in Mattoon, perhaps as a twisted homage to Ellison's experiments or as a means to further their own dark agenda. The investigation into the Mattoon Monster took on a new urgency. Jonathan and Mrs. Hale, along with a small group of dedicated townspeople, began to search for any remaining clues related to Dr. Ellison's work. They combed through historical records, interviewed old-timers who might have known Ellison, and even conducted their own experiments based on the journal's recipes. The more they uncovered, the clearer it became that the Mattoon Monster might not have been an isolated incident. There were whispers of similar occurrences in other small towns across the Midwest, suggesting that the terror could have been part of a larger, more sinister pattern. Despite their efforts, the true identity of the Mattoon Monster remained elusive. The case never saw a definitive resolution, and the townspeople were left to grapple with the unsettling possibility that the fear they had experienced might have been part of a long-standing and shadowy legacy of experimentation and terror. To this day, the story of the Mattoon Monster serves as a chilling reminder of how fear can linger long after the source has disappeared. The mystery of the Mattoon Monster, entwined with the enigmatic legacy of Dr. Victor Ellison, continues to haunt the town and the imaginations of those who delve into its dark history. As Jonathan Reed and Mrs. Hale continued their investigation into the Mattoon Monster, they began to receive anonymous threats warning them to stop their research. Despite the intimidation, they pressed on, driven by their growing belief that uncovering the truth was crucial to understanding the frightening events that had transpired in their town. One frigid December night, Jonathan received a cryptic package at his doorstep. Inside was an old, ornate key accompanied by a note that read, "The truth lies where the darkness sleeps." The key was rusty but seemed to be from an antique lock. Jonathan and Mrs. Hale speculated that it might be linked to Dr. Ellison's experiments. After some research, they discovered that the key matched the description of a lock on a long-abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. The warehouse had been unused for decades and was rumored to have been part of Ellison's private research facilities. The pair decided to investigate the warehouse, hoping it might hold further clues. On a cold, moonless night, they approached the warehouse, the key clutched tightly in Jonathan's hand. The building was in a state of disrepair, its windows shattered and doors rotting. With a sense of apprehension, they used the key to unlock the heavy, rusted door. The interior was a labyrinth of dusty, cobweb-covered equipment and long-forgotten scientific apparatus. Amidst the clutter, they found a series of old filing cabinets. Inside one of them, they discovered detailed records, including receipts for exotic chemicals and strange symbols scribbled in the margins of notes. The records also included a series of entries about a mysterious, final experiment. At the center of the room, partially hidden behind a tarp, was an old, decrepit machine. It looked like a cross between a scientific apparatus and an arcane ritual tool. The machine had tubes and valves, and a complex network of wires and pipes connected it to an array of glass vials containing dark, viscous liquids. As they examined the machine, they found a diary hidden within a compartment. It belonged to Dr. Victor Ellison and detailed the culmination of his work, a device designed to induce extreme fear and hallucinations, intended to be used on a larger scale. The diary described how the device could create an atmosphere of terror that would leave victims in a state of paralysis and profound dread. The final entry was chillingly clear. The experiment will conclude where it began. The truth will be unveiled in the place where shadows merge. Jonathan and Mrs. Hale realized that the warehouse itself might have been the site of Dr. Ellison's last, unreported experiment. The warehouse's location was near the old, overgrown cemetery at the edge of town, an area that had always felt eerily quiet and unsettling. Determined to uncover the full extent of the mystery, they ventured into the cemetery. They found an old, neglected crypt that seemed oddly out of place among the modest gravestones. The crypt's door was heavy and sealed, but with some effort, they managed to pry it open. Inside, they discovered an array of arcane symbols and occult paraphernalia, along with more of Dr. Ellison's notes. The notes revealed that Ellison had planned to use the warehouse as a testing ground for his device, but had also intended to conduct rituals in the crypt, believing that combining science with the supernatural would amplify his experiment's effects. As they explored further, a chilling realization dawned upon them. The crypt contained the remains of several individuals, long forgotten, whose deaths were never explained. Their presence suggested that the crypt had been the site of ritualistic experiments. The combination of chemicals and rituals might have been intended to push human fear to its limits. The final piece of the puzzle emerged from the crypt's inner chamber, a large, ornate mirror. The diary mentioned a mirror of terror, designed to reflect and magnify the fear within the viewer. The mirror was covered in strange runes and appeared to be a focal point of Ellison's experiments. Just as they were about to leave, the temperature in the crypt dropped drastically, and they felt a sudden, overwhelming sense of dread. Shadows seemed to move on their own, and a low, whispering sound filled the air. It was as if the spirits of those who had been subjected to Ellison's experiments were still trapped within the crypt, their fear echoing through the ages. Jonathan and Mrs. Hale fled the crypt, their minds racing with the implications of their discoveries. They realized that the Mattoon Monster might not have been a single individual but rather a manifestation of the ongoing fear and darkness left behind by Dr. Ellison's experiments. The story of the Mattoon Monster and Dr. Victor Ellison became a dark legend, a chilling reminder of how the past can cast long shadows over the present. The warehouse and crypt were sealed, and their locations were kept secret to prevent further investigations. The community slowly returned to a semblance of normalcy, but the sense of unease lingered, as if the specter of Ellison's dark legacy continued to haunt the town. The Mattoon Monster's tale remains a haunting enigma, a story of fear and the unknown that continues to send shivers down the spines of those who delve into its chilling depths. Months after the discovery of the crypt and the sinister mirror, the town of Mattoon tried to return to normal, but a sense of unease hung heavily in the air. Jonathan Reed and Mrs. Hale remained deeply affected by their findings, and they decided to go public with their story, hoping that shining a light on the past might finally lay the old fears to rest. They held a press conference, revealing their discoveries and the chilling history of Dr. Victor Ellison. The story quickly spread, capturing the imagination of the public and attracting paranormal investigators, historians, and curious thrill-seekers from all over the country. The crypt and the warehouse became focal points for investigations, but despite numerous attempts, nothing was ever found that could definitively explain the strange occurrences or the lingering sense of dread. One day, a well-known paranormal researcher named Lydia Hawthorne arrived in town. Lydia was renowned for her work on haunted locations and had a reputation for solving cold cases involving supernatural phenomena. She had heard about the Mattoon Monster and was intrigued by the potential link between Dr. Ellison's experiments and the paranormal activity reported in the area. Lydia's approach was methodical. She set up a series of investigations using advanced equipment to detect electromagnetic fields, temperature fluctuations, and EVP, electronic voice phenomena. She also employed psychics to attempt to communicate with any lingering spirits. Her findings were perplexing. The equipment frequently malfunctioned around the old warehouse and crypt, and psychics reported disturbing visions of shadowy figures and a sense of being watched. One evening, Lydia and her team decided to conduct a final, in-depth investigation in the crypt. They had been working late into the night, their equipment capturing intermittent anomalies that seemed to defy explanation. As they explored deeper into the crypt, Lydia's team began to experience strange sensations. Sudden drops in temperature, feelings of paralysis, and the unmistakable sensation of being observed. Lydia herself felt an oppressive presence. As she approached the mirror, she experienced a powerful wave of fear and anxiety. Her heart raced as the mirror seemed to shimmer and distort, reflecting not just the physical surroundings but also shadowy, indistinct figures that seemed to move with a life of their own. Desperate to understand the mirror's effect, Lydia attempted a ritual described in Dr. Ellison's notes. She hoped to use the ritual to communicate with whatever presence might be trapped within the mirror. She chanted an incantation while focusing on the mirror's surface. The air grew heavy, and the crypt was filled with an eerie, otherworldly light. As Lydia recited the final words of the ritual, the mirror's surface began to change. The reflections showed not just the room but also scenes of terror, visions of people in fear, their faces contorted in silent screams. Lydia saw images of the past experiments, the faces of those who had been subjected to Ellison's devices, and the shadowy figure that seemed to torment them. Suddenly, the mirror's surface shattered with a loud, echoing crash. The room plunged into darkness, and the temperature plummeted. Lydia and her team scrambled to regroup, their equipment going haywire. The presence in the crypt became almost palpable, a suffocating weight that made it difficult to breathe. When the lights flickered back on, the mirror was gone, reduced to shards scattered across the floor. The air felt lighter, but the sense of dread lingered. Lydia's team had experienced something profound but could not explain it fully. The mirror's destruction seemed to have released or dispelled some of the oppressive energy that had been trapped within the crypt. After the incident, Lydia documented her findings and concluded that the mirror had acted as a conduit for the fear and anguish associated with Dr. Ellison's experiments. By shattering it, they might have released some of the trapped energy, though the full extent of the impact remained unclear. The Mattoon Monster's legacy remained a topic of fascination and fear. The warehouse and crypt were eventually sealed off, and the town of Mattoon gradually moved forward, though the stories of the Mattoon Monster continued to intrigue and unsettle those who heard them. Jonathan Reed and Mrs. Hale continued their lives, forever changed by their brush with the supernatural. They remained vigilant and cautious, always aware of the thin veil that separates the known from the unknown. Lydia Hawthorne's findings became a part of paranormal lore, serving as a chilling reminder of how the echoes of the past can sometimes manifest in ways that defy understanding. And so, the legend of the Mattoon Monster lived on, a haunting story of fear and mystery that lingered in the shadows, a testament to the enduring power of the unknown. As the investigations wound down, the town of Mattoon gradually returned to a semblance of normalcy. The crypt and the warehouse remained sealed, and the story of Dr. Victor Ellison and the Mattoon Monster became a cautionary tale told in whispers. Despite the seeming end to the immediate supernatural activity, the case left a lasting impression on those involved. Years passed, and the once legendary tale of the Mattoon Monster faded into the realm of urban legend and folklore. Jonathan Reed and Mrs. Hale moved on with their lives, but they remained haunted by the memories of their discoveries. Lydia Hawthorne continued her work in the field of paranormal research, but the Mattoon case was a frequent topic of her reflections, as it was one of the few mysteries she had never fully resolved. One evening, many years later, Jonathan received an unexpected letter. The envelope was old-fashioned, with a wax seal bearing an unfamiliar symbol. Inside was a single, handwritten note that read, "The shadows are not gone. They wait in the places we dare not look. Return to the source, and the truth will be revealed." The note was unsigned, but it carried a sense of urgency. Jonathan shared the letter with Mrs. Hale and Lydia, who had kept in touch over the years. They decided to return to Mattoon, convinced that there was something they had missed, something unfinished. Back in Mattoon, they revisited the old warehouse and crypt, which had since fallen into further disrepair. With renewed determination, they explored every inch of the sites. While the crypt remained sealed, they noticed something peculiar. The symbol on the wax seal matched one of the arcane symbols found in Dr. Ellison's journal. Their search led them to a forgotten part of the cemetery, where they discovered an overgrown, hidden entrance to an underground chamber. It seemed to be a previously undiscovered section of Ellison's old experiments. Descending into the chamber, they found more of Ellison's documents and another mirror, similar to the one they had previously encountered. This mirror was different, however. It was ornate, with intricate designs and symbols carved into its frame. As they examined it, Lydia felt a familiar, oppressive energy. The air grew colder, and the shadows seemed to close in around them. The mirror's surface was dark and still, reflecting only the dim light of their flashlights. Jonathan carefully examined the documents, which revealed that Ellison had planned a final, grand experiment. He intended to use the mirror to open a rift between the physical world and a realm of pure fear. This experiment, however, had been incomplete due to his sudden disappearance. The documents described how the mirror could be activated by a specific sequence of symbols and rituals. Lydia, Jonathan, and Mrs. Hale decided to perform the ritual, hoping to understand what had been left behind and perhaps bring closure to the lingering fear that had haunted Mattoon. As they completed the ritual, the mirror began to shimmer and distort, showing scenes of terror and darkness. The chamber was filled with a blinding light, and a chilling, otherworldly voice echoed through the space. The mirror seemed to draw in the shadows and fears, creating a vortex of swirling darkness. Suddenly, the light burst forth, and the mirror shattered into countless pieces. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, and the chamber felt lighter. It was as if the mirror's destruction had released whatever dark forces had been trapped within. The shadows receded, and the sense of dread that had pervaded the site dissipated. Emerging from the chamber, they felt a profound sense of relief and resolution. The final act had seemingly closed the chapter on Dr. Ellison's dark legacy. The crypt and the warehouse were sealed permanently, and the underground chamber was carefully covered over. The documents and fragments of the mirror were taken to a secure location, their details never to be made public again. The town of Mattoon slowly healed, and the legend of the Mattoon Monster became a story of the past, a reminder of how the darkness of history can sometimes reach into the present. Jonathan, Mrs. Hale, and Lydia moved on, each forever marked by their encounter with the unknown. And so, the tale of the Mattoon Monster came to an end, but the echoes of its haunting past lingered in the corners of the collective memory. The story remained a chilling reminder of the thin veil between the known and the unknown, and the ever-present possibility that some mysteries are better left undiscovered.